guided by a similar clarity of purpose. Now let us play. I often find myself reflecting on the turn his own life took. The loss of his first wife placed him within that very reality, one that continued to receive him even as it turned away from countless others. That contrast did not leave him untouched. What followed was no sudden transformation. It took the form of a gradual awakening, does not always withstand the test of justice. That awareness did not remain confined to thought, it found its way into action. At a time when widow remarriage invited social hostility and personal isolation, he chose to marry a woman who had lost her spouse, Anandibai, in 1893. The consequences followed inevitably: social boycott, exclusion, and a gradual withdrawal of acceptance that compels conformity far more effectively than open opposition. But yet Karve held his ground. What began as a deeply personal decision grew into a lifelong commitment to restore dignity where it had long been denied, and to reimagine the moral limits that society sets for itself. The course of his life did not rest with that single act. It carried forward into institutions, into the education of women, into the creation of spaces where dignity could take root and endure. Over time, that same moral clarity appeared in a different, equally demanding form in the life of his son, Raghunath Dhondo Karve, born in 1882. If the father challenged social exclusion, the son chose to confront a different barrier, a barrier shaped by silence. He spoke openly on questions of sexuality and reproductive rights at a time when such subjects remained deliberately unaddressed and swept under the carpet. Resistance followed him as well, drawn from a deep discomfort, grounded in the same impulse to bring into the open what society hesitated to acknowledge. A century earlier, in 1772, Raja Ram Mohan Roy was born into a world deeply anchored in tradition. He moved between traditions, studied with intent, and engaged with ideas to examine rather than simply gather them. What he encountered did not sit easily within him. Tension, a mind took shape, one that refused comfort in unquestioned custom. It began within his own family. His elder brother had passed away, and the household gathered in the shadow of a grief that had barely found words. I want you to pause with me for a moment here. In that space stood his sister-in-law, now a widow, her life altered in an instant by a loss she had no hand in shaping. What followed unfolded under the weight of expectation, treated almost as inevitability. She was taken to the funeral pyre and forced into the flames under the sanction of a ritual. Raja Ram Mohan Roy stood there and witnessed it, saw a life still full of breath consumed in the name of duty. Some moments recede with time, others take hold and remain. This was one that endured. It did not remain a passing memory. It stayed with him, unsettled, demanding an answer he could not ignore. What had long been spoken of as virtue began to reveal a harsher truth, a form of suffering sustained through silence, repetition, and the weight of unquestioned custom. He did not turn away from that discomfort. He carried it with him. In the years that followed, he wrote, he spoke, he engaged, grounded in what he had witnessed with his own eyes. His words were not crafted for effect. They arose from conviction. At the heart of his effort lay a question that continues to confront us. Can a practice claim legitimacy when it stands in opposition? Under Lord William Bentinck, the practice of sati was abolished through Regulation 17 of the Bengal Code, declared illegal and punishable. What had long been endured as inevitability met the authority of law. When I reflect on this journey, what stays with me is its character. He did not rely on a single act of defiance. He chose the harder path of sustained engagement, questioning what had been assumed, writing with care, inviting scrutiny. In his letters and interventions, a consistent thread emerged. Truth must withstand examination. Belief cannot rest on ritual alone. Society must gather the courage to look at itself without illusion. Reform in his hands arose from what he had come to see and could no longer set aside. The next part of my presentation, I deal with what I call Indian civilizational idea. Morality never arrives as a doctrine waiting to be declared. It travels into conduct, into choices made when no one is present to observe us, into responses shaped when silence would have been easier. It does not begin as argument. It begins as lived conviction. It was in 1893 in Chicago, at the Parliament of the World's Religions. The hall stood filled with representatives from many traditions, each carrying their histories, their convictions. Into that space walked Swami Vivekananda, young, unfamiliar to most present, and carrying a clarity that does not seek to compete but to connect. He began with a line that has traveled through times, and I want to say it exactly as he said it. This is a direct quotation. Sisters and brothers of America. In that instant, the room responded with a warmth that broke the formality of the gathering. What followed did not take the form of a defense of one path over another. It opened into something far more expansive when he said, "We believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true." Even at that point, Swamiji's thought didn't rest with criticism. It moves towards possibility, toward a way of living where difference can exist without weakening unity. And unity does not demand sameness. There is strength in his words, though it does not arise from opposition. It comes from balance, from remaining rooted without closing oneself, from holding conviction without hardening into rigidity. Standing before that gathering, he offered something more than a message. He revealed a way of engaging with the world and with humanity at large. And it brings me back to the thread that has been unfolding through these lives. Life does not take shape through assertion alone. It is formed through how one holds difference, how one carries conviction, and how one creates spaces for others while remaining anchored within oneself. In the early decades of the 20th century, Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore wrote what would later find its place in creative unity. These are words that do not rush towards a conclusion. They unfold with care as reflections gathered over time, shaped through a sustained effort to understand what holds life together beneath its visible fragments. He does not turn first to systems or structures. He begins with an experience, something within us that refuses to be reduced to function alone. In those pages, I find Gurudev turning inward, drawing attention to something many of us have felt, even if we have never named it. He speaks of a presence within us that does more than observe. It seeks to bring things together, to discover coherence where life often appears scattered. I want to share his words here exactly as he wrote them. As Gurudev Tagore puts it, it is something within us that gives expression to an ideal of unity in its endless show of variety. When I read this, it does not come to me as an abstract idea. It feels closer to recognition. It reminds us of how we respond to music, to beauty, to those rare moments when scattered experiences seem to gather into something whole, something that holds meaning beyond immediate understanding. As I sit with his words a little longer, a different way of approaching life begins to unfold before us. Life does not appear as something to be arranged from the outside. It takes shape through the manner in which we attend to life, through how we relate, how we respond, how we draw together what would otherwise remain separate. What we find compelling here is the absence of insistence. There is no demand that life follow a prescribed path. Instead, there is an invitation, gentle yet deeply compelling, to recognize that what we create in thought, in action, in relationship, carries within it the possibility of harmony. Now let me bring about a sudden break in the tune or the theme of my lecture and take a little break and dwell on today's world. As these reflections gather in my mind of lives shaped with care, of choices guided by attention, I find myself drawn to the present. What does that same discipline of attention ask of us today when the conditions around us stand so profoundly altered? Change usually never arises. Change never usually arrives in a single or dramatic instant. We see change unfold through the way information now travels, at a pace and scale that leaves little room for reflection. Change appears in fragments. I recall, for instance, the recent elections in Nepal. Images and voices began to circulate, familiar, persuasive, but often fabricated. Speeches surfaced that were never delivered. Faces appeared to speak words they had never uttered. What concerns me is how easily the line begins to blur. For many, the distinction between what has occurred and what has been constructed grows harder to sustain. Presence once carried its own authority. Today, production can imitate it with unsettling ease. What follows from this is the way doubt begins to displace certainty, in the way verification struggles to keep pace with circulation, and in the ease with which impressions settle before they are examined. Attention moves away from asking whether something is true and turns instead towards reacting as though it already stands confirmed. You see something on Instagram, your attention turns away from asking whether it is true towards reacting to what you have seen as if it is the truth and the whole truth. So in that movement, the ground of trust begins, almost imperceptibly, to give way. In the United States, as political campaigns gather momentum, I see the landscape of communication take on forms that escape immediate notice. Videos begin to circulate, polished and persuasive, carrying the tone and cadence of public figures, crafted through artificial means. They travel with remarkable speed, often outpacing any effort at verification. By the time questions arise, impressions have already settled. What remains is more than misinformation. It creates a deeper disorientation, a gradual erosion of the line between what is seen and what can be trusted. These moments, they never stand alone. We inhabit a world today more connected than ever, where information travels without restraint, and within that very connectivity, a certain fragility reveals itself. The challenge before us no longer lies only in receiving information. It lies in how we attend to information, in our willingness to pause, even briefly, and ask, what is real? What is constructed? And what are we prepared to accept without question? Earlier this year, in the US, 2 states, Alabama and West Virginia, concluded investigations into the online gaming platform Roblox. Children logged into what appeared to be a space for play and found themselves in environments that extend far beyond that purpose. Investigators pointed to instances where minors encountered grooming, exposure to sexual content, and interactions that moved from the game into private channels. The matter led to a settlement exceeding USD 23 million, accompanied by requirements for stronger safeguards, age verification, tighter control over communication, and closer monitoring of interactions. Investigators entered these digital spaces as participants rather than distant observers. They created accounts, some designed to resemble very young users, and allowed them to move through the platform as any child would. What unfolded in certain instances carried a troubling edge. Interactions turned suggestive, conversations entered inappropriate territory, and the safeguards meant to separate age groups proved unreliable in practice. What stands out here is the ease with which such moments arise, often without drawing immediate notice. In Australia, regulators have stepped forward and demanded clear answers from gaming companies. They asked how such environments were monitored, how children were protected, and whether existing systems could truly prevent exploitation. The concern rests on a recognition that platforms used daily by millions of young people can also become points of entry for harm when our collective vigilance weakens as society. These events reveal a transformation in the very character of the spaces which we inhabit. What once felt contained now extends without clear edges. What appears as play carries layers that remain hidden at first glance. And for those who move through these spaces, especially the young, the experience carries complexities far beyond what it seems from the outside. Times are changing. With the advent of technology, our age has given us 4 new rivers, 4 currents Shastri ji could not have imagined, but which will decide the future of India. And isn't it natural? After all, the gilli danda has been replaced by the smartphone. The first river is artificial intelligence. In May of 2023, a man by the name of Geoffrey Hinton, often called the godfather of AI, walked out of Google. He had spent 50 years building the very technology that won him the Turing Award. He left, he said, so that he could finally warn the world about what he had helped to create. When a journalist asked him why he had built it in the first place, the journalist asked him, well, why did you leave and why are you now in doubt and then why did you create this in the first place? He said, and he answered with a sentence which one cannot forget. He said, I console myself with a normal excuse. If I hadn't done it, someone else would have. That is the alibi of every engineer, of every weapon in every age. And it has now become the alibi of an entire industry. Albert Einstein, who once stood inside this same shadow, warned us long ago. And he said, it has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. That's where the danger lies today, where the technology which we have created is threatening and has in fact exceeded our own humanity. Today, an algorithm decides who gets the loan, who gets the interview, who gets the bail, who is seen and who is buried in the feed. And when the algorithm errs, no one is held to account. The coder blames the model blames the data, and the data blames the history. This is legal innocence in its newest, most powerful form. And here our forefathers asked us a question. If you build a machine, if you cannot answer for, are you still a moral being? The second river that we confront today is cyber warfare. In 2010, a worm called Stuxnet slipped into the computers of an Iranian nuclear facility. It made the centrifuges spin themselves to death. No bullet was fired. No border was crossed. No soldier marched. There were no boots on the ground, and yet a war was waged. Welcome to the new battlefield, where the soldier is invisible, the weapon is a few lines of code, and the casualty is a hospital somewhere that cannot run its dialysis machine tonight. The 1965 war that Shastri ji fought had rules, a Geneva Convention, a front line, an enemy you could see across the sand. Today, when a power grid flickers in Mumbai, We cannot say with certainty whether it was a fault, a hacker, or a hostile state. The rifle has gone digital. The plough has gone digital. Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan now demands a third line. Glory to the scientist. But also responsibility upon the scientist. Because the soldier who fires a bullet knows he has fired it. The coder who fires a worm may never know what he hit or whom. The third river that we confront today is the dignity of the human body. There is an industry in our age that has done what no invading army ever managed to do. It has entered every home, every phone, every adolescent's bedroom, without exception, and it has done so legally. I speak of pornography, and of its newest, most monstrous child, the deep fake, the use of artificial intelligence to take the face of a real woman, often a schoolgirl, often without her knowledge, and place it onto a body in scenes to which she has never consented. In September 2023, a small Spanish town called Almendralejo woke up to discover that more than 20 schoolgirls, some as young as 11, had been deep-faked into pornographic images by their own classmates. The pictures had spread across the town's phones before the girls had finished their breakfast. The law had no name yet for what had been done to them. This is morality without law in its cruelest form. The legal system arrived years too late, with a vocabulary far too small. The fourth river is climate. But before I deal with climate, let me just say this. India has made data cheap. We are among the countries in the world where data is the cheapest. We have allowed data to proliferate. In nuclear technology, there is a dual-use doctrine. Technology which can be used for peaceful purposes and technology which can be used for assault on humanity. Data today has the same problems. Data which has given blessings to humanity which were unfathomable 20 years ago. Reaching out to patients who would have no access to medicine, for instance. Safeguarding the environment. Safeguarding agriculture. But it's the same data which can produce hordes of deepfakes. Target our children. Target young women and the not so young women. So what is India going to do? Is India not going to come out with a law which will ban pornography, which will ban the depiction of women on the internet in its cruelest forms? I think the time has come for India to enact legislation which will meet this third river, the river which constitutes an assault on the human body and human integrity. The fourth river which we confront is the climate change. This is perhaps the cruelest of the four because most of its victims have not yet been born. In January 2023, the people of Joshimath in our own Uttarakhand woke to find cracks splitting their homes in two. The mountain was sinking under them, roads buckled, temples tilted, a town built over centuries vanished in a matter of months. In July of 2024, in Wayanad, Kerala, a single night of rain killed over 200 people. Entire families were gone before dawn. In India, I feel these changes less as distant data and more as lived experience. There have been seasons when the monsoon arrives unevenly, delayed in one region and intense in another, leaving farmers to navigate uncertainty where predictability once guided every decision. At the same time, the summer offers its own form of instruction. One steps out in the afternoon and returns with a new appreciation for shade, for water, and for every ceiling fan that continues to function. In its own way, climate is no longer a matter of discussion alone. It is something we encounter directly in the course of everyday life. In cities, rainfall that earlier passed now gathers with greater force, turning familiar roads into flooded stretches within hours. Yesterday, I read that according to real-time global temperature rankings on a single day, 95 of the world's 100 hottest cities were in India, with temperatures in several places rising well above 45 degrees Celsius. Numbers like these carry a reality that no abstraction can soften. They enter daily life into how people work, travel, wait, and endure. What stands out is that these are no longer isolated episodes, remembered for their rarity. They form a sequence that people begin to anticipate, even as hope holds on to a different outcome. It points to more than isolated disruption. It reflects a world where stability itself feels less assured. Movements that once appeared routine, of goods, of seasons, of expectations, now carry an undercurrent of uncertainty. What stays with me is the manner in which this is unfolding. It does not arrive with spectacle. It takes shape through decisions made elsewhere, through weather that arrives differently, through small adjustments that gather, slowly and steadily, into something far more consequential. The spring meeting of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund concluded on 18th April 2026 in Washington, D.C. They unfolded under the shadow of tensions in West Asia, at a time when global pressures had already begun to weigh in on supply chains, unsettled energy markets, and reshape economic expectations. Within that setting, leaders engaged with a range of pressing concerns: sovereign debt, the emerging oil crisis, and the implications of a slowing global economy. As I reflect on those discussions, what stands out is the difficulty of sustaining alignment even on shared long-term challenges. Resistance from major economies, particularly the US, to advancing the global climate agenda reveals how complex collective decision-making has become in this moment. Yet make no mistake about it, we are interconnected as we never before were. Data has interconnected us. Climate change has shown us that we belong to one integral humanity. And the impact of war, as recently as in the Gulf, tells us that what happens in the Strait of Hormuz can have a possible impact not only on energy markets in India and Indonesia, but on elections in November in the US. That's the impact of this global interconnection which we all share. It signals a world adjusting its expectations downward, learning to proceed with greater caution in an uncertain terrain. So where does that lead us to ethics in the age of AI? What we earlier recognized as a matter of moral discipline in individual life now enters the domain of systems, institutions, and decision-making. And in doing so, it comes to be expressed as the ethics of public life. Decisions which once rested visibly with individuals now move through systems that learn, classify, and recommend, often before a human mind has had the opportunity to intervene. The question then is no longer only what is decided, but how that decision comes into being and whether that process remains open to understanding and accountability. At Amazon, engineers developed a system intended to review resumes at scale, drawing upon past hiring data to identify patterns and recommend candidates. For a time, it appeared efficient, even precise, but as the system was examined more closely, it became evident that it had begun to favor certain profiles while downgrading others, reflecting patterns embedded within historical data. The system had not been instructed to discriminate, it had learned to do so. By 2018, the project was set aside, not because it failed to function, but because it functioned too faithfully to the data which it had inherited. In parts of India, as we know, predictive policing tools analyze past records, incidents, locations, and patterns of reporting to identify areas where attention may be required. At first glance, The method appears grounded in data, guided by repetition rather than instinct. But the data itself carries the imprint of earlier decisions, where policing was concentrated, which communities were more frequently recorded, and how patterns were shaped over time. As these systems learn, they return to those same patterns, reinforcing attention in ways that may not always reflect present reality. It is here that the ethics of public life acquires a renewed significance. Integrity no longer resides only in the intention of the decision maker. It must extend into the processes through which decisions are shaped, into structural design, into oversight, into the willingness to question outcomes that appear seamless on the surface. Attention must deepen, scrutiny must remain active, responsibility must travel with the decision, even when it is mediated through layers that are not immediately visible. And finally, that brings me to the conclusion and to three invitations. And I'll conclude with these three invitations in a section which I called Life as an Art. The first invitation is from Shastri ji's own name. When young Lal Bahadur dropped his caste surname and took the title Shastri, meaning one who knows the Shastras, he was making a quiet but thunderous statement. He was saying, I am not my birth. I am learning. I am my choice. So my first invitation is this. Stop asking, who are my people? Start asking, what are my values? A complete society cannot be built on the arithmetic of identities. It can only be built on the geometry of shared principles. The second invitation is to decouple our morality from its rewards. We have built a civilization of transactional ethics. What are the tariffs? The tariffs are all about transactional ethics. You stop buying Russian oil and I'll reduce your tariffs. You do this and I'll impose 100% tariffs. What are tariffs? Tariffs are part of the new transactional ethics game. So we have built a civilization of transactional ethics. If each of us as citizens says that I will be honest if honesty pays, I will follow the law if I am being watched, I will be just if justice benefits me, then that's not morality. That is commerce. Shastri ji resigned from power without being asked, without reward, without political gain. His life casts on us the duty to act rightly, even when it costs you everything. The duty to act rightly even when it costs you everything. The third invitation is simply to complete the incomplete canvas. Every great artist knows a secret. A masterpiece is never finished. Michelangelo is said to have died apologizing that he had not done enough. When I was young, pardon the personal intervention or interjection, my mother used to she used to learn Hindustani classical music from Kishori Tai Amunkar, as they used to call her, Gana Saraswati Kishori Amunkar. And every Saturday and Sunday when I went with my mother to her guru, she would sing the same Meera Bhajan. And I would wonder, why is she singing the same song that she was singing last weekend? Why is she not singing something new? Even as a child of 6 or 7, I knew it was the same song which was being repeated, the same tumri which was being sung. And I would ask myself, why the same song? Today I have an answer for you. And the answer is this, that every great artist knows a secret, which is that a masterpiece is never finished. A complete society is not a destination we arrive at. It is a direction we commit ourselves to. Every generation inherits an incomplete canvas. A society with injustices still unpainted over, with laws which are still unjust, with morality still unevenly distributed. Every generation must ask, what strokes will we add My third and final invitation is simply this: pick up the brush. We are here this evening, which means that we are educated, curious, and not indifferent. That is not a privilege to hoard, but a responsibility to discharge. So let me return at the end, come back to where we began, to a boy standing at the banks of the Ganga. No money, no ferry, no guarantee he would reach the other side. He could have turned back. There was no law saying he could not. There was no shame in poverty. But something in him, call it dharma, call it character, call it the inextinguishable human refusal to accept smallness, made him step into the water. He swam. On the other side of that river was a school. In that school there was learning. Through that learning came a leader. Through that leader came a nation that, for one extraordinary moment in 1965, chose sacrifice over selfishness, solidarity over survival, and showed the world what a nearly complete society looks like. We have not finished that swim. The Ganga is still before us. The current is still strong. But the school is still on the other side. The school of the complete society, of law tempered by morality, of morality structured by law, of people who live not just legally, but people who live with a sense of shared living in a shared destiny. The only question that matters, the question that Lal Bahadur Shastri ji, with his quiet eyes